So, hi, I'd like to introduce my next topic, which is a video project that I've been working on throughout the second half of this year, which is looking at the use of video as starter for lessons. So, using video to start a lesson. And the plan here was to create these lesson starters, because I often have to walk several hundred metres between one building and the next, with no time actually for that in the timetable. So you arrive and there's a huge amount of setting up to do and organisation, and I wanted a starter activity that would get the students engaged in some work, and did all the stuff that starters were meant to do, but also gave me a chance to catch my breath. So what I've done is created a series of short videos, most of them around 5-10 minutes, for a short duration course that I'm teaching on. And what they do is they link last week's lesson to this week's and next week's, and usually they've got a set of answers and questions in the centre, or they may have a case study or an activity to do in the middle of them. So the approach, 2 minutes. Why did you try the approach? Learners' learning styles. I find that when I teach a lesson several times, I get less efficient as I go through. So that was one of the main priorities, really. And I wanted something that enabled me to raise my game, really. But also I find that as the seasons change, so the resources that I need for my horticultural teaching just may not be available at all. For example, I often will need the dense canopy of a woodland, and of course it's totally absent for a big chunk of the teaching year. Video also gives me the opportunity and capacity to illustrate location as well as physical items that are immobile. So, for example, a daffodil that I just pick and bring into the classroom is essentially a dead wild flower and has lost all those nodding colonial merits that Wordsworth wanted. But if I can go out there in the field and show vast swathes of it, then we get a chance to really see what's going on for that class. It's also a chance to do a bit of walk and talk, yet remain in our seats before the students go outside, perhaps for more of the same, but physically getting involved within the lesson, and therefore it encourages a flow and a contiguous nature of the topic. I tend to use questions within it that enable the students to confer with their neighbour, because to me group work is very important, and it gives them a chance to just bounce off ideas with each other, and also gives me a chance to see whether they've understood what I'm talking about. So the video is usually paused at that point, and then they compare answers with each other, and then they compare answers with the ones that I suggest when I restart the video after that. And I'm hopefully the activity should be purely self-contained, so that you're able to move on to the next stage of the class the moment that task finishes. Well, the first thing to note is that I'm totally self-taught. I'm an amateur. I've got no design skills. I have no concept of what's visually attractive. And so the whole process really for me was about being quick and easy, using the simplest technology and keeping it fairly raw and perhaps a bit edgy as I went through. So I grabbed hold of a first generation flip camera, partly because I've got a couple at hand, and secondly so that I can edit it in my office without having to worry about conflicts of matching operating systems, software, file sizes, all of those sorts of things. Then I literally hold the camera in front of myself and start recording. So I introduce the aims and objectives of the session in a fairly simplified way, and ask questions that encourage the students to think about the context of the lesson. I'll then create an opportunity for a pause and then answer the questions in the field, so that we've got the resources around us, and they could be almost scattered anywhere. And then of course it happens in the context and the relationship to everything else that's taking place within their course as well. And I'm hoping that also they will relate to topics that they're studying elsewhere. I then take the whole shoot back to the office and sit down and literally just bang all the snippets together one after the other, chopping out little bits and pieces every now and then. You know, we all pause and we all make mistakes as we go through. And I tend to use Movie Maker for that. Now, it's the early version of Movie Maker that's running on Windows XP, and so it doesn't handle HD very well. And I've tried using software to convert HD video into something that the Movie Maker will handle, and to be honest, it jumps. It's not particularly ideal. So working with the flip cameras in their lowest form seems to work very well, and because it works well, it just means that I can get on and do things. And then, you know, I put it back together. It's a simple process really of editing it all up and then adding some text over the top and something at the beginning and something at the end. Really, I try and make it as simple as that, not add in too much complexity. Someone did point out to me, though, that the music that I was using, which I'd just taken from my iPod really and just copied across, was probably breaking copyright law, and that's fair enough as a point. So what I did was I went home one evening, got out an electric piano, digital drum kit, and used some software called Cubasis and literally just sampled it all in, did some work on that, and then spat it out as a simple little theme tune, which I use at the beginning of every video now that I create. And maybe over the summer I'll create some more so that it doesn't become my theme tune but becomes the theme at the beginning of just these short lesson starters. As far as the outcome is concerned, really, the first thing I noticed that the very first time I did it, the students were just locked in. It seems to capture them, having video on a screen, much more quickly than almost any other type of activity. They'll just sit and they'll lock in straight away. It's an immediate thing, and they'll sit in silence until you ask them to work in groups, and then they get on and do it, simply because it's being asked for on the video. Don't know why it works that way, but it just does seem to. And they particularly like it because they know they're going to get the answers coming up when they finish doing the activity, and they've got plenty of opportunities to write down the answers and get things sorted so that their notes are straight as well. Not that I do a great deal of note-taking. One other thing that I've tried that actually I'm thinking is working quite well, but I just want to review it a bit later, is that I've tried taking the videos out of the beginning of the lesson as well and using them as preparation for the class. So actually putting them on the scheme of work online on their VLE and then letting the students do that work beforehand. So before they come to the class, they've looked through the VLE, the topic for the day, they've worked through the activity that I've given them, and so they come prepared knowing what it is that they're up against, and then they'll do another slightly different, perhaps simpler starter activity. Inspectors, lesson obs, those sorts of things, one of the things that it works well at is that once you've prepared it, you've got it prepared, and so there's less thinking. You can do all your thinking in advance, and so you don't get that nerve that you get when there's an Ofsted in your classroom. And so you make sure you've got your aims and objectives, you've got all your links set up, you've got your questions, and the thing's over, it's snappy, it's done quite quickly, and it gives you the chance to move on, feeling like you've actually given something that's quite exciting to start the class. Okay, a word of warning really on that whole topic as well is just watch out, because if you arrive in class and find that someone's turned everything off and you've got to reboot the computer, you've got to get logged in, you've got to set the projector running, all of those normal things which we often get time to do because we can arrive early for a class. But if you're rushing between one class and the next, there's often not time, and therefore that can throw you a little bit. So make sure that the technology is at least ready, you speak to the person who runs the classroom beforehand and encourage them to leave it running. Well, the biggest impact that this has had on my teaching really is forcing me to realise that great big chunks of what I do could easily be moved into video, be moved online, and all I really need is the time to go out in all weathers and collect the footage. HD works really well because it allows me to capture quite a lot of detail in practical situations, and but it does tend to restrict spontaneity when you suddenly find that you can't actually edit it up properly, or use it because your technology within the office has lagged behind. So I would recommend dropping down to the lowest common denominator. HD is great as long as you can back it up all the way through. I'm also challenged by the geographic potential that it has, and for those of us that work in the land-based sector, that is really quite important. I find it such a simple thing to do now that I've done several of them, that for instance I was out on a walking holiday with my family. We were in the ancient juniper forests in Teesdale, and they stopped and had a quick cup of tea, and I went off and I was able to prepare a lesson starter. It was actually a copy really of one that I'd done beforehand, the same questions, the same content really, but it was in a different context, and so it means that I can ring the changes a little bit more. And then it's not too much that if you forget something or you can't remember a particular name of something, that you can always add a little bit extra when you get home, drop in a photo or two, add a voiceover. So that's really nice because it's easy to do, and it just encourages you to carry your camera with you. And these days that's quite straightforward. The flips work really well. There's a little Kodak Sport that's also extremely good and copes with the wet, which the flips aren't so good at. I recorded an example of this earlier on. I'd been out in the rain and it started to click and pop and the sound wasn't so good. And of course they can capture it on the iPhone, but just be aware that different formats might need different software to edit it up. I'm not convinced that every class should start this way, but what I'm going to do is I've got a short course where I see them about 8 times, and I'm trying to see if there's a mileage in using the familiarity of always starting the class in the same way to enable us to jump more quickly into more complex topics. So that'll be quite interesting, and I'll keep you posted as to how that works. Another way that they can be used, although I've not had a chance to try it out yet, is the potential for when you're not able to be there at the start of the lesson, maybe because you're off sick or you've gone to a conference or something like that and someone else is covering your lesson. And you can use it to introduce the topic, and because you're familiar to them, there's not such a contrast. It also enables you to point out what's going to be used in the materials and resources, and it leads nicely into worksheet activity, or just as easily could be linked through to an online activity that you might be able to prepare when you find out that you can't be there. So anyway, that's my latest project, and I'm really enjoying it actually. I think it's one that's given me an opportunity to just do things and capture stuff that perhaps I wouldn't have done before. It gets me outside thinking of the way that the class should start, and particularly in the land-based sector, that's really vital that we relate the classes to the outside all the time. But I don't know about you. You see, you don't work necessarily in the land-based sector, and I'd love to see how it works with those of you that are in a different context. I can promise you and assure you fully that it gets easier and easier every time you do one. That there's less thinking to be done. You can just work from your knowledge and understanding, and as I say, you can be completely spontaneous and produce short parts of the resource elsewhere and outside, as long as you've got a camera with you, because the questions and the tying together and the other parts of aims and objectives can all be added on at a later date. And so the rules are really: have a go, make sure you've always got a camera with you, try a few, and use the technology that matches the technology that you've got available to you right the way through, so that it doesn't become a bit of a nightmare. So good luck with that one, and keep posting up examples on the JISC website, and we'll see where it goes from here. Thanks very much.